Okay, let's go this one.
Somebody tell me what the literal meaning of anemia would be. Everybody remember Anne?
So without.
Without. Good. And emia means what?
Iron. Blood. Without blood.
Blood. Yeah, it literally means blood condition. Like leukemia is a blood condition of like your white blood cells. So anemia is like without blood is the literal meaning. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have no blood, but it does mean it kind of means that. So it's a decrease in number of your red blood cells, but it can be lots of different things. It could also be an insufficient amount of hemoglobin. So if you don't have enough hemoglobin, what's your blood not able to do?
Carry oxygen.
Carry oxygen, thank you. Okay. How much, quick review, how much oxygen can one blood cell carry? How many oxygen molecules?
A lot.
Yeah, boy.
A million.
Not a million.
Billion is what I said.
A billion.
Billion.
Remember, each red blood cell carries 4 hemoglobin molecules, and each hemoglobin molecule can carry 250 million oxygen molecules.
So
pretty crazy. So anemia can be a couple things. It can be acquired, so it means that you get it somewhere along the path of your life, or inherited, like you're just born with it. So a few different things on acquired anemia. Can come from worms. It could be disease, some other disease. It could be like a secondary issue to something else that you have going on, or it could just be like your diet. So some of you guys, y'all probably been diagnosed with anemia at some point. It's pretty common, I feel like. Iron deficient anemia is probably more common here in the United States, I would say. So insufficient dietary intake of iron. What are some foods that have iron in them that you can take if you need to increase that?
Cereal.
Oh yeah, frosted flakes.
I don't know about Frosted Flakes, but definitely iron fortified cereal. And it usually says on there if it's iron fortified. What else?
Meat.
Meats definitely have lots of iron in them. Your leafy green vegetables like spinach has lots of iron in it too. So those are all things that are make for a good intake of iron. So all of you guys who want to donate blood at the next blood drive, those are all foods that you need to take or eat a couple days, start eating those a couple days ahead of time so that your iron level, your hemoglobin level will be high enough. Okay, another cause is intestinal bleeding, specifically from parasites. Obviously, this is not a huge issue here in the United States, but is actually worldwide is the biggest or most common cause of anemia when we're talking about the whole world, because intestinal worms and parasites are very common. They're extremely common in other parts of the world. Oh, what else? Let's see. And then pregnancy is the last one. And the main reason for this is that, the baby takes all the mom's nutrients for the most part, not all of them, but takes a ton away from the mom. And so hemoglobin is something else that is transferred to the baby so that they can carry oxygen, because they need to be able to carry more oxygen, especially for babies, because of the fact that they're getting blood that's already been through the mom's system, if that makes sense. So they're already getting blood that's not as oxygenated as like the initial blood that we would normally get. So they need lots of hemoglobin to carry extra oxygen so that they can get all that they need. And that's pretty common. Iron deficiency anemia is very common in pregnancy. I don't know very many people who during their pregnancy didn't have to take iron supplements. Most people do. Okay, the next one is aplastic anemia, and this is specifically damage to the stem cells in the bone marrow. So remember that the stem cells, they kind of like split up to make other types of cells within the bone marrow. So you got like one type of stem cell that might make red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets. So when you damage those, then it's actually gonna be an issue with all of the cells. So a few different things that can cause it, like toxins, like things that we take into our body, something that can cause aplastic anemia. Radiation or chemo is a common cause of aplastic anemia. So those can damage those stem cells and make it where they won't produce cells the way that they need to. Infectious disease, I think some of the examples it gave was like hepatitis and HIV. Other autoimmune disorders can cause that, and then heredity. So you're just, born with some of those problems as well. Usually whenever you see that word aplastic, I find that depending on where it is, a lot of times it's like cancer related, or maybe it's stem cell related. I'm not sure which. But anyway, a pernicious anemia is something I've seen a lot of, especially in home health, because it generally happens in people who are older. But this is where their intestines cannot absorb vitamin B12 very well. And vitamin B12 is, if you'll remember from the last section, is required for red blood cell production. So it's really important that we get vitamin B12 into our system. So they said that it can be caused by a couple of things, or some things can make you more at risk for it. Diabetes, Addison's disease, and thyroiditis. Those are some examples of things that can make people more at risk. But I saw tons of home health patients who had pernicious anemia. And usually you just give them a shot of vitamin B12, or they can take it by mouth. Some of you guys who went on home health visits in Health Science 2 probably saw somebody taking vitamin B12. Usually it's given by an IM shot. And hold on a second, I gotta plug in my computer. Die. That would be bad. So it's given by an injection, and it literally looks like Kool-Aid. Like it's like red Kool-Aid. I remember the very first time I gave that, I was like, what is this? I am not putting this in this person's arm. It is like red. Kind of strange looking infection. It said that some of the signs and symptoms are like a red swollen tongue, pale skin. Pale skin is pretty much a symptom for all types of anemia. But fatigue and shortness of breath, those are also symptoms of anemia. You think about it, if we don't have enough red blood cells, or if it's not carrying oxygen, then our respiratory system is going to try to make up for that. And so we're going to increase our respiratory rate. We're going to get short of breath. Those are things that are just naturally going to occur as our body tries to make up for it. And then also, hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, there's also anemias caused by chronic disease. So you've got rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease, kidney disease. You think about it, what hormone, do you remember the name of the hormone that comes from the kidneys that causes red blood cell production? Starts with the E. What? Well, we know red. What's the word for red? Erythro. So the name of that, the name of the hormone is erythropoietin. Does that sound familiar? If it doesn't, you should probably study before Wednesday. So erythropoietin, that's the hormone that the kidney sends out to the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells whenever it notices that we're not having enough oxygen. So if you've got kidney disease, it may not send that hormone out, which is going to decrease your red blood cell supply. Chronic infections, and then, of course, cancer. Okay, inherited anemia. So a couple of different inherited anemias we'll look at. First one is sickle cell. Sickle cell anemia. I usually have a video that we watch about sickle cell anemia, and I didn't even think about it till just now. Anyway, sickle cell anemia is inherited, something that you're born with. It's a recessive trait. So somebody who has sickle cell anemia had to get the trait from both of their parents. You can carry the trait, though, and not not have the disease itself, but you can, pass it on to offspring. But what happens is the red blood cells have a really abnormal shape. So instead of looking like their normal little donut looking shape, like up here, they look like this. They look like sickles. If you've ever watched a movie or seen pictures of a sickle like that they used to use to gather wheat or like cut wheat with, then that's kind of that shape. That's what's called that sickle cell anemia. So what happens is sometimes their body goes into these crises, and their blood, their bone marrow will start kicking out these sickle-shaped cells. And what do you foresee as some problems maybe with this shape of cell versus this shape of cell?
Can't hold oxygen as well.
Can't hold as much oxygen. What else?
It's stuck easy.
It gets stuck easy. That's exactly right. Those are the two main issues. Okay, think about this one. It's pretty movable. It can squeeze through capillaries that are really small. This one, not so much. It's a lot more rigid. And one of the things it said was that whereas normally your hemoglobin is just like little sprinkles of hemoglobin, then where are we? Down here, hemoglobin is lined up. Okay, hemoglobin is lined up like in strings. So anyway, so those are two issues. So their body will go into these crises, and all of a sudden they'll start creating these sickled cells, and so they get major bone pain. Serious, excruciating pain, as well as clotting, especially in capillaries all over their body. So very, 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 very painful episodes whenever they go through these crises. Usually the first treatment, or at least the initial treatment, like when they first get to the ER and they're going through a crisis, is pain medicine. So they usually get some morphine. They'll start getting fluids, and they'll get a blood transfusion. And they get a blood transfusion because what that does is that increases the volume of blood and the red blood cells that can carry the oxygen in their bloodstream. So it increases that, and then the volume helps to open up some of those capillaries, so the ratio of sickled cells to regular cells is going to be fewer, and it's going to have less likely to get clotted. If you guys look, you can turn on the light for a second. There's a poster at the back of the room. That poster I showed you guys the other day that has the red blood cells on it, and you can see it really good. There's also a little magnified microscope picture that has sickled cells, maybe towards the bottom somewhere. Anyways, and they're actually sickle shaped. You can see them. They're almost like pointing looking. So that's so you take a look at that before you leave today. It gives you a pretty good picture of that. The second one on here is Cooley's anemia, and I'm not as familiar with that one as I am with sickle cell. That's not something I've had a whole lot of experience with. It says that it's also called thalassemia major is what it's also called, and it's anemia that affects hemoglobin itself. It says it limits the body's ability to produce fully developed hemoglobin, and so in light of that, the proper number of red blood cells. I think I said that backwards a while ago. I think I said that we have 4 hemoglobin molecules on every red blood cell, and each one holds 250 million. I think that it's the other way around. I think I said that backwards. There's 250 million hemoglobin molecules on every blood cell, and they each carry 4 oxygen molecules. I'm sorry. I got to thinking about that, and I said that backwards. So anyways, Cooley's anemia, so they're not producing mature hemoglobin that can actually carry the amount of oxygen that it really needs. So it says that they require frequent blood transfusions to increase their red blood cell count, that they have to be really careful because, iron is required for your hemoglobin to function. So if they don't have that mature hemoglobin, then they have free iron floating around in their bloodstream. And so that's one issue, is that if they get a whole lot of transfusions, they can get too much iron in their bloodstream. And then the book talked about chelation therapy, which is where they actually remove that iron and remove metals from your blood. One problem always involves devolves into a bazillion other issues. So, okay, jaundice is something you guys have probably heard of. Y'all probably had family members or somebody who's had a baby that's been jaundiced. They usually look kind of yellow or orangey, especially in their eyes, like the sclera of their eyes will turn yellow, and then their skin will kind of have a yellow hue to it. It means that they have excess bilirubin. So bilirubin is one of the things that is a product of, like, when your red blood cells are broken down, when they're used up and your body gets rid of them, bilirubin is one of the things that's released. Well, bilirubin is removed by the liver. And so if your liver is not functioning correctly, that's why people who have liver damage can get really jaundiced. Newborns get jaundice because their livers are still really immature. And so some babies are born, if their liver's too immature, then it's not removing that bilirubin like it should be. Usually that resolves within a couple weeks of after they've been born. But the other thing is that those UV lights, they have Billy lights, and they put babies under these lights like this picture on here. And so whenever they do that, that helps to actually makes their body break down some of that bilirubin as well. It says it lowers it in the blood. Pretty crazy. Now, a lot of times if the baby is stable enough to go on home and doesn't necessarily have to sit under the Billy lights at the hospital, they'll tell them to move their crib or their bed into a window and open up the shades of the window during the day so that the baby can get UV light, from the sun. So anyways, pretty interesting. Other blood disorders, hemophilia is one of these. This is an inheritance. They're born with it. And I think I talked about this maybe last week, but it's usually somebody who's got hemophilia, they're missing one of the factors that's required for the blood to clot. So we talked about the clotting process last week and how it requires this factor to clot. There's different ones. And so they're usually missing one of those. And so if they start bleeding or if they get hit, they get infection, something starts happening, then they have to usually, like when I was at Children's, we gave factors. Sometimes kids would come in, they'd had an injury or they'd gotten sick and they felt like their hemophilia was they could kind of see it because they were having trouble with the bleeding or whatever. Then we can give them that clotting factor. It comes in this tube, this vial system, and you have like this double needle and you have to mix it up specially for them, like right at that moment. Otherwise, it's not any good. You can't mix it ahead of time. It's like you mix it and give it right then. And so it's kind of a specialized type of treatment. But we saw a lot of these when I was at Children's, a lot of hemophiliacs. Sometimes they refer to them as like free bleeders. Polycythemia is an overproduction of red blood cells. So poly means what? Y'all remember?
Many.
And cyto means cell, and emia means like condition of too many cells. Okay, and it causes the blood to get really thick and kind of hard to get through those capillaries, so it can carry some of its own risks with it. Talked about one of the things I talked about with polycythemia was living at high altitudes, because that can contribute to it. Because high altitude, you have less oxygen concentration in the air, so they need more cells to carry more oxygen. Let's see. I think that's it. It says polycythemia is diagnosed by testing hemoglobin or hematocrit levels. Unusually high levels of hemoglobin or hematocrit indicate excessive red blood cell production. So there's a couple other things. People, if they have a type of cancer, that can cause polycythemia too. Okay, leukemia is a cancer of the blood. So emia, again, is blood condition. Leuko means white, so it's usually involving the white blood cells. And there's different types. Your book actually lists out 4 different types of leukemia in here. But it's usually the way that they diagnose it is they look at a complete blood count, like we looked at the other day in class. And then they'll have like an excessive number of white blood cells. And I'm not talking about an excessive number like I think it was 5 to 11,000 is the normal white blood cell count. If somebody gets an infection, they might have 15,000 white blood cells. I'm talking thousands, like 75,000 of white blood cell. That might be their count instead of the normal 10,000. So that's with leukemia, overproduction, and depending on the type of leukemia, it tells you what type of white blood cell they might have. This myeloblasts, these are stem cells that turn into other cells, so that's that one. Lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell we looked at the other day. This is a good example. This shows you these purple ones are the white blood cells. The red ones here are the red blood cells, and you can see, if you'll remember from that, looking at that complete blood count, a normal red blood cell count is like 4 to 5 million per, cubic millimeter or whatever. These were like 10,000. So there should be a large number of red blood cells compared to white blood cells. But you can see in this picture, your white blood cells, or these white blood cells, outnumber the red blood cells. So that's a clue that there's something serious going on. People can have acute or chronic leukemia. What does acute mean?
It progresses faster.
Yeah, usually progresses faster. It's a little bit more severe in nature, at least for the time being, versus chronic, which lasts for a long period of time. Sometimes they have symptoms that are a little bit more vague. There's not such a crisis like acute would be. Here's the other two. Chronic lymphocytic, so it has lymphocytes again, and then granulocytes. Remember, you have agranulocytes and granulocytes, so that's that one. One of the other thing that they might find with leukemia is said swelling in the lymph nodes. Remember, your lymph nodes are associated with white blood cell production too, and the same with the spleen. An enlarged spleen, another thing that would indicate that. And let's see. Treatment for leukemia. Skipped ahead a little. Treatment for leukemia is usually your chemo, radiation, or they might have to have a bone marrow transplant where they completely obliterate their bone marrow, get rid of all their white blood cells, and they replace their bone marrow with another person so that it can start producing blood cells again and produce them correctly. Pretty crazy what all they can do to do that. Multiple myeloma is the last one on here. This is another type of cancer, specifically in the plasma cells in the bone marrow. And says the plasma cells of a person with this disease divide many times that create more cancerous cells, and then they create these myelomas. Oma is like a tumor or a mass, if you'll remember that, and myelo is bone marrow. So these can really damage the bone. It said that it especially affects the back and the ribs. And it can release too much calcium into their bloodstream, can cause kidney damage, all kinds of issues with this. This is the second most common type of blood cancer and affects quite a few people. So it is treatable. It's not necessarily curable. It doesn't necessarily, completely go away. So anyways, that's it as far as these go. So cancer of the blood is which one of these?
Cancer of the blood is
Leukemia.
Their blood does not clot. What do they have?
Hemophilia.
Good. Yellow colored skin.
Jaundice.
And then the last one is the decreased number in red blood cells, anemia. Okay. Well, y'all get your chapter stuff. Make sure it's done by tomorrow. And have a good day.
Bye, Miss Burrow.
Bye. I'll send you these links so that you can play it for the next class.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.